Okay, it's like a singer here, right? So I'm very happy to be here under the invitation of my friend Peter, who stressed several times that I have to be simple and brief. And I will. I've finished. Goodbye. That's it. Okay, the point is I'm following Peter's instruction. And he asked me to say what action is, how it is defined in the Anglo-American debate, and that's very easy, because there is a canonical definition that comes from Elizabeth Anscombe and Donald Davidson that says that an action is an event that can be described by referring to the reasons for which the agent performed that action. So this makes actions intentional, in the sense that they are connected with the intentions of the agents. So the idea is that I can describe, of course, an action like with the physicalist vocabulary, referring to the neurological happening and whatever, but I can also refer to the mentalistic generation of the action. So referring to the beliefs, the intentions, the desires of the agent. Another point, especially stressed by Davidson, is that these reasons, so my desires, my beliefs, my intentions, can be the causes of the action. So the action can be described referring to neurophysiological or physical or biological causes and to psychological mentalistic causes. Of course, there is a big metaphysical debate about the relationship between these two sets of causes. Still following what, actually Peter could have given my talk because I'm really following his instructions faithfully. He asked me to talk about freedom, so let's start with a famous analytic philosopher, Immanuel Kant, who in the third antinomy of the dialectic of the critic of pure reason describe an opposition to good theses that seem to, of course, both true, but are, at least prima facie, incompatible. And this, I think, is still the situation. So let's mention Kant first, and then say why I think the problem is stressed in the critique of pure reason is still with us. So for Kant, it's absolutely obvious that we are free in at least some parts of our lives. We do sometimes things because we are free. This is actually something that we can't ever stop believing. It would be impossible for us. Why? Well, because freedom is the ratio essendi, or the condition of possibility of responsibility. We call it imputability, but it's the condition of morality. Without freedom, there is no morality. So freedom is absolutely essential. We cannot think of a world in which human beings are not, at least sometime, moral. So freedom is essential. On the other side, freedom is impossible from another point of view. And the point of view is that of the sciences. Kant was a Newtonian, so he thought of the world as a deterministic entity, in which there is no space for a free agent. An agent would be an unbearable exception to the laws of nature. Someone who could decide between alternative courses of nature without being determined. This is, Kant says, completely at stake with the deterministic character of the Newtonian physics. According to determinism, and Newtonian physics is deterministic, every event is completely determined by past events and the laws of nature. There is nothing that can be an exception. So what to do? That's the problem that Kant poses. And then, both in the Critique of Pure Reason and the Critique of Practical Reason, he gives his solution that everyone knows. So it's in terms of the distinction between phenomenon and noumena. Freedom cannot be real in the world of phenomena, but it is real in the world of noumena. The only problem with this solution is that appeals to an idea that most philosophers nowadays find unbearable. The idea that we have to think of freedom as in the world of noumena means that we have to think of our reactions outside the space-time. Okay? Noumena, the world of noumena, is not a world in which space and time make any sense. So people nowadays try to solve a kind of a version of Kant's problem without referring to this distinction between noumena and phenomena. If I have to set the framework in which this philosopher works, I would say that it's an Aristotelian framework in which there is no really dualism. It's not even a Cartesian framework. It's an Aristotelian framework. There is one universe in which there are agents. What to do there? Some philosophers, some, the most sophisticated, know this, some are just unaware, but just repeat the third antinomy by Kant in new terms. I mentioned, for example, John Searle, who is not the greatest expert in history of philosophy, but really rephrases the antinomy. So, on one side, and Peter Benningwegen at Notre Dame University is probably the most relevant or well-known expert in the free will debate nowadays. He says exactly that free will is a mystery because on the one side it seems indispensable, on the other side it seems impossible. And he's a Mysterian, and in doing this he refers to Lorenzo Valla, the famous Italian humanist, that said we'll never solve the problem of free will. Will always be a freedom. Another will always be a mystery. Another person who thinks this is Noam Chomsky, so the influential linguist. So let me say something about the reasons for which the antinomy of the new, the antithesis of the new antinomy can be stated. Why is freedom impossible from some point of view? There are two sets of reasons. One is merely philosophical, purely philosophical. Freedom is impossible both in a deterministic and in an indeterministic world. And the world is either deterministic or indeterministic. That's one set of issues, and philosophers discuss this a lot. But I don't want to discuss this now, because this wouldn't be in line with what Peter told me. Be simple. So I will discuss the more interesting, I think, other form of presentation of the thesis, freedom is impossible. This comes from the sciences, especially cognitive sciences and neurosciences, connected with genetics, theory of evolution, and so on. So the idea is this. There is a lot of evidence coming from cognitive science that we actually act for reasons we don't know, or for causes we don't know, and we rationalize a posteriori inventive, justifications for what we have done, but these justifications are simply false. And it's actually impressive enough how many cases there are of this. So this is one example. Early cognitive science, in 1977, a famous example, a famous experiment by Nisbet Wilson, two famous social psychologists. If I put here a stand with black women's stockings, 4, and I ask you, what's the best of these 4 stockings? 80% and more of you will say that the best is the one on the right side, your right side. And I will ask why. And you will say, you have to write, the texture, the color, the luminosity. Okay. The first stockings are identical. The reasons for which you prefer the one on the right, they are known to most of you, or most of us before I was told recently. We have a bias in favor of the right side of the body because most of us uses the right hand. So we choose for a reason we don't know and invent an explanation. We think that we see the stocking on the right side as better. Actually, they are identical. We don't say it as different. We just justify a posteriori the choice we have made without knowing why. And now, let's do this. Okay, I show a brief, it's like 3 minutes, a BBC video of a very good and nice experiment. I won't say much. And then we'll comment.
But there's another problem. These men have discovered that sometimes your brain appears to conspire against you, and no amount of scribbling can solve that. Petter Johansson is forcing people to make decisions.
This one.
It's a simple enough task for most people, and in fact, it isn't the real point of the experiment.
Why did you prefer that one?
Higher cheekbones, slightly better hair, not much between them.
Petter Johansson and Lars Hall have devised an experiment which calls into question many of our assumptions about how we make most of our everyday decisions.
We're interested to see what kind of detail the representations behind people's decisions and what kind of insight they have about those decisions. Why did you choose this one?
It seems like he'd be someone with a very interesting personality.
This is all quite boring until you look at the experiment from a different perspective.
We added a twist, a card trick, so that sometimes they choose one face but end up with the other one.
Watch carefully. The volunteer chooses the card on the left.
This one.
But Petter swaps the card and presents the photo that was seen on the right and was actually rejected.
It is a card trick, but it's a cheap card trick, based on something that the magicians just call black on black. So for each card, there's a hidden card behind it, which is actually the opposite one. Where we slide the other card over, the black card is hidden. And then Petter just uses his arm to slide it down into his lap.
I mean, it's two parts that's interesting here. First, the fact that they don't notice when you switch the pictures. It's interesting in itself, and it's quite surprising. And the second part is, of course, the verbal reports they give, that they actually motivate choices they didn't make.
80% of the people we tested had absolutely no idea that a switch had been made.
Again, this one just struck me. Interesting shot. Since I'm a photographer, I like the way it's lit and looks.
It's a puzzling phenomenon.
This one.
Lars and Petter think that it can only be understood by looking at our fundamental relationship with our surroundings.
We rely upon the world. The world is dependable. So if you reach for your car keys, you don't end up with the armadillo in your lap. Or something like that.
The one on the left.
It might also be that we simply can't countenance our decisions being wrong. Once we've made up our minds, there's far too much invested to backpedal. We simply post-rationalize and pretend that it was a great choice all along.
Interesting from there.
Okay, this was done. This was experiment was done at the home of a friend of. No, let's stop it before. Okay, it was done at the place of a friend of mine who didn't know what was going on until he watched the movie.
In a nutshell, is your guide to logical decision making.
It's
Identify.
you know, in biology there is a term. This is resilient.
Write them down. Even wait for them using math.
Okay, so this friend of mine didn't know that what was going on there until the end. The point that people, when rationalize their choice, even when it wasn't theirs at all. And there are others. Last example, I give you four. Much time? Okay, so I'll give you another 10, 15, 20. You said okay, very. So I give you a folder with four sets files with the reports of an interview that some candidates did for a job. You are not part of the jury. You have only to judge who's the best is. The candidate you prefer. There is the report of the interview plus the CV of all candidates. Each of the 4 candidates is very good for one reason. One knows many languages, another one is very sociable, another one is a sense of leadership, and the last one has a great experience. So there are 4 great candidates. I give you these 4 reports, but unknowing to you, I divide you in 4 groups. So the first group, I give these 4 sets of reports, but I add something to the first candidate. I had this thing. During the interview, the candidate, you just throw up the coffee that was offered to him, okay? That. And with the second group, I'll do the same with the second candidate. The same with the third group, with the third candidate, and the fourth candidate with the fourth group. So each of you, each of the 4 groups, has this little peculiarity that is added to one of the 4 candidates. What happened is that almost 90% of you will choose as the best candidate the one who's, threw up the coffee. But 0% of you will say that when I ask why did you choose that candidate. You'll say, oh, I prefer him because he has sense of leadership, a great experience, knows the language, is very sociable. But we know the reason, for statistic reason. The reason is that we sympathize with that person. I'm not suggesting to young people when they go for an interview no, it doesn't work that way. We sympathize with the person just because we know that no one will hire that person. You don't want someone who destroys your desk. It's dangerous. You don't want that clumsy person around. So we sympathize with that person. But the interesting philosophical point is that we don't know that. We don't know why we chose that. No, when the scientists told people, look, you think you have chosen this person because knows the languages. Actually, you chose him because he threw up the coffee. And the person said, who are you to tell me why I chose that person? The point is, actually, this is wrong. The reason for which we chose that person is unknown to us. We rationalize a posteriori. We invent explanations to reappropriate actions and choices we haven't decided to do at all. So it's the point is this: we invent explanations for explaining things we have done sometime, or even sometimes we haven't done, like in a movie. But the point is that we don't know what we do, why we have really done things. According to some scholars, philosophers, and scientists, this is the universal law. According to human beings, we always rationalize a posteriori with all our actions. This is, for example, Carl a very respected philosopher and a cognitive scientist. So he thinks that we always rationalize a posteriori. We never do things for reasons we know. Okay, that's one challenge. And the other one, similar one, comes from the neurosciences. Let me show this. No, that's not. Okay. This is a famous article, very much discussed. Also, Pym has written an interesting article on this. It's probably the best experiment. It reports about the best experiment in a tradition that started with the famous neurophysiologist Benjamin Libet. These experiments are supposed to prove, especially, that really free will is not something that we should talk about. Look at first at the title, Unconscious Determinants of Free Decisions in the Human Brain. Here the idea is that our free decisions are determined by events that are unconscious in the brain. Here the unconscious is not the Freudian unconscious. The Freudian unconscious contains mental contents that are unconscious temporarily or potentially can become conscious again. This is the point of going to psychoanalysis, right? Analytic treatment. But this is not the case with unconscious, cognitive unconscious. It's not that something you go to the psychoanalyst and he'll find this is not knowable from the first person point of view. And this kind of events always, according to these people, cause our actions and decisions, and they are totally unconscious. So read the first lines of the article. The impression that we are able to freely choose between different possible courses of action is fundamental to our lives. This is what Kant said is fundamental. However, it has been suggested that this subjective experience of freedom is no more than an illusion, that our action are initiated by unconscious mental processes long before we become aware of our intention to act, long before. So before we act, things happen that determine what we'll do, and don't know what we'll do at that point. So let's read the first two phrases in the abstract. There has been a long controversy as to whether subjectively free decisions are determined by brain activity ahead of time. Subjectively free in commas, because the point of the article is that what is subjectively free is not objectively free. There is no such a thing in the world as free will or free decision. We found that the outcome of a decision can be encoded in brain activity of prefrontal and parietal cortex up to 10 seconds before it enters in awareness, okay? So 10 seconds before what we have chosen, the scientist knows what we have done. And you're repeating an example that Peter suggested me to do. I'm actually repeating exactly what Peter told me to do. Think about this. You go to the restaurant tonight and they say, do you want, let me do an Italian example that's easy for me. So you want pasta or pizza, okay? And you start to think. And the waiter goes away. And you say, well, 1 second, I want pasta. And he says, okay, I've listed that 10 seconds before. I knew. You have decided 10 seconds before what you wanted, just you didn't know. But I'm a good neurophysiologist, I knew that. 10 seconds before you are aware of your own decision, okay? So the point is, according to these people, this proves that free decisions do not exist. I think that these are interesting experiments. This, for example, is an experiment that talks a lot about our consciousness, the opacity of our own consciousness. But, we can be free sometime, even if we are not conscious. That's the first point to state. Let's assume, for example, that I want to drink what I actually want to do. So this is just because I want to drink. I want to drink, and, what's your name? Igor asks me a question. So he asks me a good question. So I start to think. In the meantime, I drink, think and then reply, and then I ask myself, did I drink? And you say, of course you have drunk. Come on. I didn't know this. Still, I wasn't aware, but still, it was my own decision. I wanted to drink, and I did. So even if I wasn't aware of drinking, it was my own decision to drink. So this proves that sometimes, at least, we can be free in doing something, even if we are not aware when we do things. Anyway, more importantly, in this experiment and in the others, there are interesting things and things that are, used in a wrong way and for philosophical reasons. So about all the ideas that, all these experiments saying, look, you rationalize a posteriori choices that you make, but you don't know why you make these decisions, and you just invent explanations. What can be said is there is a lot of evidence that this is a frequent phenomenon, but no evidence and no argument for proving that this is the absolute rule. That's a bad induction. There are situations in which this happens, but I don't think there is any sense in which we can think that, for example, students enroll in a university for reasons they don't know, that they made up decisions. That's not, at least not necessarily the case. So it's not necessarily the case that we'd end up married with somebody we didn't really know who that person was, and we didn't want. There is no justification of the induction that goes from this, single experiments to the universal law that we always justify a posteriori choices that we make for reasons we don't know. I think we can still think that many decisions of ours, especially the important ones, are made for reasons we know, even if the decisions can be wrong, but still we know why we made them. And this is also interesting. This is interesting because the point with this experiment is that it's taken to be, I'll tell you a little more, has the example of a free decision. How does it work? Works that way. The subject has two bottles in front, and he has to push one or the other, left or right finger, for 50 times. He has to relax, and when he feels it says when you feel the urge to do so, you press one or the other. But when you feel the urge, that's a mark of the decision. You look at the big watch there. That's the moment when you have taken the decision, made up your mind. That's the moment of the decision, okay? And the scientist comes to you saying, okay, I knew that 10 seconds before. So you relax. When you feel the urge, you press. That's the moment in which you've made a decision. The scientist comes and said, okay, I knew 10 seconds before what you would have done. However, I think that even the title of this experiment is wrong. It doesn't concern free decisions at all. It doesn't concern free decisions because this decision here, pushing the right or the left button for 50 times, I don't think is the prototype of a free decision at all. And the reason is, you have with the light?
Yes.
Okay, that's essential.
That's a faithful assistant.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much. Okay. Very faithful, but where is the light? Okay, thank you. Okay, here they said, at some point, when the subject felt the urge to do so, they were to freely decide between one of the two buttons, operated by the left and right index finger. I press it immediately. Now, feeling the urge is taken as the mark of a free decision. But I'm asking you, when we make a decision that is subjectively free, we feel any urge? That's not the rule at all. When you decide, it's not that you are at the restaurant, you want to decide between pizza and pasta, and then suddenly you feel the urge and order pasta. It doesn't happen that way. Or when you marry someone, it's not that you are there, suddenly yes, I will marry you. Doesn't work. I mean, the vast majority, if not the whole set of the decisions we make that we think are free, we don't feel any urge to do so. Moreover, if we feel the urge to do so, what happens is not a free decision. Let's assume that Peter now feels the urge to sneeze. Peter is a famous sneezer. I don't know if can be scary, right? So if he feels the urge to sneeze and then he sneezes here in this context, do you think he made a free decision? No. So notice the set of free decisions and the set of things we do when we feel the urge are disconnected, or at most there is a very little overlapping. So this here, unconscious determinant of free decisions, these are not free decisions at all. They are not free. But there is more. There are not even decisions. And this is explained in a famous movie. Have you seen A Beautiful Mind? The movie A Beautiful Mind? Who hasn't seen it? Raise their hands. Okay. You study too much, guys. You should watch movies. In that movie is the biography of John Nash, the Nobel Prize who invented the theory, created the theory of decision theory, game and decision theory, right? It's a great branch of mathematics, economics, and psychology. And he formalized what common sense has already told us about what a decision is. A decision is a choice we make in a situation of uncertainty when we evaluate the different possibilities we have by weighting the reasons we have for one or the other, our preferences, okay? That's a decision. When our preferences are at stake. You have to tell me what preference I can have when I have to press one button 50 times. So if the scientist comes to me and asks the 37th time, why did you press the right button? Who knows? I don't know. Why? Because this is not really a decision. It's an automatic action I do. I don't care. So this is not really, it's not even just not a free decision. It's not even a decision, but it is considered here as the prototype of free decisions, and the conclusion is that we never make free decisions. This experiment is totally irrelevant for the issue of free will. Plus, and that's my last point about this, even if we were determined, even if we do things because, let's assume that we do things for reasons we do not control. Is this so shocking? I mean, physics have told us that probably what we do depends on past events, and not just physics, also, thinking about our history, our experiences. It's clear that we make decisions for some reasons, and that some of these reasons or causes go back, and we don't know all of them. So we are conditioned by events that we don't know. That's obvious. But still, and that's a crucial difference, there is a big difference if I go to the restaurant and I order pasta because I want pasta, and I go to the restaurant and order pasta because Peter ordered me to order pasta. This is the big difference. When it's my will that's involved, my desires that is involved, and that's autonomy. And when it's someone else's desire that is involved, that's heteronomy. That's the crucial difference. The issue of determinism is a red herring. It's not crucial here. And so even if we were determined, that wouldn't be enough to say that there is no such a thing of free will as a free will or a free action. So, no more minutes for me? 3 minutes. Okay, I will sing the Italian national anthem now. No, I will only say that this is not irrelevant from a political point of view. Because there are people now who say, look, because free will doesn't exist, then responsibility doesn't exist. And if responsibility doesn't exist, merit, retribution do not exist. So punishment has to be dramatically rethought without thinking about retribution, punishing someone who deserves it. We should only think about what's good for the consequences of the punishment, okay? You punish someone when it's useful to punish that person. And this seems very humane to some commentators, and that's wrong. It could be humane to punish people only when it's useful to punish people, but it's certainly not humane to punish people who do not deserve to be punished. We also want to punish only people who would merit punishment. And in order to spell out these notions, someone who merits to be punished, someone who deserves to be punished, you still need responsibility and free will. If you give up them, you will end up with scapegoats. Because sometimes it's useful to have scapegoats. Have you seen this other movie, Paths of Glory by Kubrick? Yes, Paths of Glory by Kubrick. It's a true story. It's about what happened in World War I in many armies. They had scapegoats. When the generals thought that the army wasn't fighting enough, they chose 3 or 4 people and executed them in their own army. And there is this beautiful debate between in the movie by Kubrick. So the good guy, that is Kirk Douglas, says, how can we execute them? They don't deserve it. They are innocent. And the general says, who cares if they're innocent? It's useful. It's useful. Merit is not relevant here. That's the risk that we run into if we give up the idea of merit and desert and responsibility. So, but there is still hope. That's my conclusion. Thank you very much.